Good morning. I am Kathy Williams. I am your worship associate this morning. Please rise as you are willing and able and join me in hymn number 112 in your gray hymnal, Do You Hear?
Good morning. My name is Jim Russell, and I'm the Secretary of the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley. Whether you've been with this congregation a decade or more, or this is your first time, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, we welcome you. Whatever your theological stance, we welcome you. Whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. Whatever your heritage, we welcome you. We respectfully acknowledge the territory on which our church building sits as the ancestral homelands of the Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger people. I have one announcement. This afternoon at 5 o'clock, in honor of the holiday, there will be a service at the Star of Bethlehem Church in Ossining. Everyone is welcome. Information about it can be found in this week's e-news. For the most up-to-date information on these topics and others, please refer to our weekly e-newsletter and check our website frequently. And please join us for conversation after the service. If you're present in the sanctuary, please come to the Fellowship Hall. If you're watching on live stream, the link for our Zoom coffee hour can be found in the Saturday reminder in your email. If you're just recently joining us and would like to receive our weekly e-news, please email us at uucroton@gmail.com with your name, and we will make sure you're added to our e-news list. Also, please remember to silence your phones at this time if you're here in the sanctuary. Once again, we welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley.
Of New York State. They are a lead organization with the New York State Poor People's Campaign. Both professionally and in his free time, Joe organizes on issues of health care, labor solidarity, criminal justice, and immigrant rights. Joe is a lifelong New Yorker growing up in the mid-Hudson Valley near New Paltz. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Music Education from the College of St. Rose in 2004 and a Master of Arts in Global Leadership from Fuller Theological Seminary in 2012. He is a licensed minister with the Mennonite Church USA. Joe lives in Albany with his wife Leslie and their dogs Artix and Nim. He plays baritone saxophone in the Victory Soul Orchestra, and in his free time he enjoys finding vegetarian restaurants and exploring the Adirondacks via foot, bike, and canoe. Please welcome Joe Paparone.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd just like to open the brief invocation. On Martin Luther King Day, we gather in the spirit of struggle, understanding that freedom and justice are not simply bestowed, but are won through struggle, through organization, through collectivity, and at great cost and sacrifice. So we join our voices into that spirit of struggle to study and reflect and celebrate the history, but also carry that work forward.
I'd like to now invite Emily Kluge up. Yes, yes, you. And any children present with her to come up and ring our bell 8 times, representing the 8 UU principles we aspire to live by. Thank you. These chalice lighting words are from Kathleen Mateague. Into this home, we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring compassionate hearts and a will toward justice. Into this home, we bring the courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home, we bring joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering, we bless this place. In its shelter, we know ourselves blessed. Sorry. And now, please join me in saying our unison affirmation. The words are in your order of service. Inspired by love, our mission is to seek our true nature, connect deeply and openly, and act for justice. Let us now bear witness to the joys and sorrows experienced in our community. If you have a very brief yet personally significant joy or sorrow that you are willing to share, please come up to the microphone and speak loudly so that everyone, including the people at home, can hear you. And if you would prefer to only have a candle lit without speaking, please just stand and I will light a candle for you.
My name.
Okay, good idea.
1, 2, 3. Is this mic
Just
working?
one moment, we're going to sing the children out, we forgot.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Olga Young. I'm from New York. I used to live 112th Street on Fifth Avenue. And I moved to Croton 13 years ago. I was working, and one day my boss said to me, "Olga, don't you tired of riding the Metro-North train?" And she says, "I'm going to get you a place to live up here." I was mesmerized. When I came up here, I was working in Bethel Nursing Home. And one day I put on my uniform, and I couldn't go down the stairs. And I said, "God, what's happening to me? I'm just 66 years old. Why is this happening to me?" So I went to the doctor, the orthopedic in Bahala, and they tell me I need 2 knee replacement surgery. Now, I'm from Central America. I was born in the Canal Zone, but I'm not American because my parents are Spanish. My mother's from Costa Rica and my father's from Panama. And these are the 2 knees that I came here in America with. And now I have to cut them and get knee surgery. But I was in denial for 7 years. But now I'm going to have a cataract surgery. March 2nd, I'm having the right hand one done, and March 17th, I'm having the second one done. Not only that, when I went to the osmolargy clinic on Friday, I said to myself, okay, let me cross the street. It was 1918 Compound Road. I said, let me cross the street over to Hudson Valley Hospital and tell them about this pain. And now they're telling me that I have arthritis. They tell me I have all the whole of this of arthritis.
Can we speak with you more?
And well, I'm going to stop crying and talk. Anyway, I feel like Humpty Dumpty. I sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great hall. All the king horses and all the king men could not put him back again, but I know my Lord that I serve. Right now I'm in excruciating pain, but I'm not going to take those painkillers because they are drugs. I know that the Lord I serve is going to touch me. He's going to touch me because the devil is a liar, but I know the Lord I serve is going to make me well again. That's all I got to say.
Is there anybody else, Jim?
Hi, I'm Leah Nelson. I just wanted to say how joyful I was that Joe Paparone is here today. I first learned about the Poor People's Campaign at the Unitarian Church. And I feel like both parts of my life are coming together today, and it just feels really great. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Christine and Clayton, and I just wanted to come up. I had a wonderful visit. My whole family, we went out to visit my mother and my sister, and then I was able to just come back recently, spending special time with my mother and my sister, and I just wanted to put a thought out. My mother continues to suffer and decline with something called primary progressive aphasia, where she's losing her ability to speak, and it's very hard on my mom and my sister. So I'm just trying to think of them and support them from 3,000 miles away. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tara Greenway, and I've recently started attending here. I can talk louder. Okay. I'm Tara Greenway, and I recently started attending here, and I, 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 I really just so appreciate this congregation. I wanted to share a joy and a sorrow and kind of observe that sometimes they're exactly the same thing. So my sister-in-law, Cindy, who's an amazing woman and theologian, was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's a few years ago. It's been very, very difficult for her and her family and my whole family. And this past week, Cindy was able to be a keynote speaker at a Women in Ministry conference at Princeton Theological Seminary, where she and my brother got their PhDs. And she came into the city and met me for dinner with her friends who were at the conference. And it's just so beautiful, and so it's such an inspiration to me that her faith and her just sheer determination allow her to, or enable her to continue doing her soul's work, even though her body is really just every day crops up with some new thing, and she doesn't know, maybe it'll be a good day and maybe it'll be a bad day, but she just keeps on going. And it was such a joy to see her doing what she loves to do despite it all. Thank you.
Just two things. A gentleman from my home congregation in Vermont passed away last week, Ken Hershey, and so if we could collectively hold him in the light or pray, however you understand for families that are suffering. Ken was a remarkable man, but the reason there are Mennonite churches in Vermont is because the Mennonite church is a historic peace tradition. And so Mennonites, as conscientious objectors, were sent to Vermont to work for their alternative service, and they started new churches there. And so Ken has a personal experience of resistance to war and commitment to peacemaking. The second thing is that, as many of you know, a few thousand nurses in New York City went on strike this week, and that's a very challenging thing to do for anyone, but especially in healthcare fields. But they are fighting for all of us. They are fighting to provide good health care for everyone that comes through those doors and for their entire community and city. And they have a tentative agreement, and it looks like they are going to win most of their demands, so we can celebrate with them.
We also acknowledge all the unspoken joys and sorrows held within the sanctuary of our hearts, and all those people who have yet to find a spiritual home where they can share their joys and sorrows. I'm going to invite you now to join me in a spirit of prayer or meditation. Please settle a little more comfortably into your pew or chair. Close your eyes if you wish, and just allow your body to relax bit by bit into this sacred space. Breathe in deeply and breathe out slowly. Breathe in deeply and breathe out slowly. Breathe in compassion and breathe out peace. Feel your body relaxing into this space and hear the sounds of silence around you. There will be a minute of silence, which will be followed by a musical meditation.
reading for reflection this morning is a short passage from Dr. King's 1967 Massey lectures. If you've not heard of those before, that's okay. They were towards the end of his life. He gave a series of radio lectures to the CBC, and they're really remarkable. Many of us are familiar with at least a few of his most popular speeches, certainly from the March on Washington, maybe a few others. But these are really powerful and succinct explanations and explications of his thinking and the development of his theory and analysis towards the end of his life in 1967. And the additional bonus is that because they were recorded for a radio broadcast, we have very crisp and clear recordings of them all. So you can find these entire lectures. I would encourage you over the next day or so to listen to any or all of them. All you have to do is Google King Massey lectures and you'll find the recordings online.
The poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. They must organize a revolution against that injustice, not against the life of the persons who are their fellow citizens, but against the structures through which the society is refusing to take means which have been called for and which are at hand to lift the load of poverty. The only real revolutionary, people say, is a man who has nothing to lose. There are millions of poor people in this country who have very little or even nothing to lose. They can be helped to take action together. They will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life. Beginning
know I'm just a visitor, but I'm grateful for a community of care. I can take care of one another. Right? And there's a song we sing in the Poor People's Campaign sometimes. I'm not going to do an improv version of it, but it goes, I'm going to lift my people up, they're not heavy. I'm going to lift my people up, they're not heavy. I'm going to lift my people up, they're not heavy. If I don't lift them up, if I don't lift them up, if I don't lift them up, we will fall down. I'm glad to join you today. And as you've heard, my name is the Reverend Joe Paparone. I'm the lead organizer with the Labor Religion Coalition of New York State and a coordinator in the New York State Poor People's Campaign. Now my job, the Labor Religion Coalition, we seek to unite faith, labor, and community groups in working for social, racial, and economic justice. And as an organization, we've chosen to invest nearly all of our time and capacity into building the Poor People's Campaign in New York. Now I, as mentioned, grew up in the Mid-Hudson Valley. I am a Mennonite, a licensed Mennonite minister. And some people are familiar, at least a little, with Mennonites. Other people have maybe heard it before, and sometimes when I say I'm a Mennonite, they were like, wait a minute, you've got a mustache, and you drove a car here, and I've seen you using technology. And that's because the Mennonites are part of the same sort of branch of the faith family tree as the Amish, and there are, in fact, many plain dress Mennonites in our state and around the country. There are folks that you wouldn't know the difference between Amish and Mennonites, but as I am here with you all, we are on a spectrum. Also, I was adopted into the Mennonite family. I didn't grow up Mennonite. I grew up in an Irish and Sicilian heritage family. We went to Catholic church. Because that's what we did. And not that we prayed or talked about God or read the Bible at home. We did say grace before meals, but we went to church on Sundays. I was an altar server. And my faith journey was a bit of an eclectic one because as I was growing up, I had some questions about what was going on. What were we doing here? And I was trying to take this faith experience and faith tradition seriously. And when I got to college, I met a number of other folks, my classmates, who were also struggling to take their faith experiences seriously. And we went and visited a church up in Saratoga. And our first visit, I don't generally recommend this, although it did work out for me. Our first visit was an evangelism workshop. I don't know how that became the thing we went to, but this was an evangelical church, and we show up and we're talking about how to share your faith with your neighbors in a not a pushy way, but clearly an evangelical kind of way. And that was the first experience I had where somebody said, my coworker is Catholic and I'd really like to, help them come to the Lord. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, I thought we were all on the same team here. I had not a consciousness or a conception of these religious divisions at that time. Nonetheless, again, while I would not recommend an evangelism workshop as your first visit to a church, I met some remarkably compelling people, and we decided to start participating in this church a bit. And it was there that I discovered just a remarkable community of people that was committed to loving their neighbors, that was committed to building up their community, that was driven by their faith, right? Their understanding of the Bible and the leading of the Spirit. And there were contradictions and challenges of that, right? But I felt a call to ministry, and I attended a seminary. I had an opportunity to travel and lead some short-term mission trips to Southeast Asia, to Cambodia, one of the poorest countries in the world, heavily oppressed over decades. And it was there that I saw this glaring contrast of wealth and poverty that was due to Thailand being a comparatively much wealthier country right next door to Cambodia and exploiting and extracting the natural resources and the people resources of Cambodia. And it was there, our host missionary, who was a very conservative person, as he's taking us to the border to leave, I said, what do you see happening here in the next 5 years? He said, when we travel around the US, everybody wants to know about the conflict between Buddhism and Christianity, right? Like this clash of civilizations. He said, that is not capturing anybody here. That is not anyone's agenda. He said, what's happening here is capitalism. He said, they're going to pave this road. They're going to keep taking wealth and resources and people, either people who are actively seeking better opportunities, or there's a lot of human trafficking that occurs on that border, right? And people being literally kidnapped and taken away. He said, that's what we're going to be up against, and that's what we're seeing play out. And then I got to sit on a plane for like 20 hours and think about that as we made our way back to the US and try and translate those experiences back to upstate New York. And frankly, and the church I was part of was in Saratoga Springs, which also has a pretty high disparity of this concentrated wealth around the casino and the racetrack, and these old, wealthy spa mansions, and then a lot of rural poverty surrounding Saratoga. Saratoga County has the highest number of trailer parks in the entire state. And so that's their affordable housing program, right? And so in the process of working this out and trying to figure out, well, okay, what does it mean to understand these kinds of relations? Where do they show up? I would find the exact same kind of power relations that I witnessed in Cambodia and Thailand over here in the US, but we obscure it, we hide it behind words of like development and the real estate interests, or even simple things like waste disposal, right? That we produce so much garbage, but we just have services that take it out of our sight. Whereas in poor countries like Cambodia, they find a spot just outside of town and they kind of dump it all there and everyone can see it, or it's slowly burned away. They don't have the kind of infrastructure to obscure the waste of capitalism. It was in Cambodia that I first witnessed police violence, where some young men were accused of stealing mangoes and from a private grove, and the police came and assaulted them. And we were with the medical missionary when they arrived and were brought in. And obviously, that is a crisis here as well. But today I want to talk a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign and why, through that whole journey, through becoming a Mennonite minister, a commitment to peace and justice and nonviolence, which is part of the Mennonite tradition, I've come to be committed that understanding the Poor People's Campaign and the vision of Dr. King at the end of his life is the path forward, is the necessary path forward, not only for our communities, for our state, for our nation, and in fact the world. So some of you may know a bit about this, but I want to share a little bit of history of the original Poor People's Campaign. Why I think it's critical to revive and continue that campaign today. So a year before Dr. King was assassinated, he gave a speech at the Riverside Church in New York City. And the speech was popularly known as Beyond Vietnam. It was his first public denunciation of the Vietnam War. And I should note, his wife, Coretta, was always a bit ahead of him in terms of analysis and principles in politics. She often was dragging him along in some ways, although she didn't have the same public profile while he was alive. She had been urging and pushing him to speak out against the war for quite a while. But in this speech, not only did King denounce the war, he identified what he called 3 interlocking evils: racism, militarism, and poverty. And he argued that you could not take on one of these without taking on all of them, that the 3 were completely connected. And he received a lot of pushback for the speech and this new direction that he was taking. He was told to basically stay in his lane of civil rights. But he was recognizing that the civil rights movement, up to that point, having made substantial progress and won remarkable victories, was still not enough. He would say things like, what good is it to sit at a lunch counter? Arms had been a major force in the country for years. The Montgomery bus boycott started in 1955, right? This was a protracted struggle, and depending how you define the civil rights movement, you could go back even further from that. That was Dr. King's first emergence onto the scene as a prominent leader in Montgomery. But there was a lot going on, right? And it was extended over many years. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, desegregation struggles around schools and lunch counters and buses. Lyndon Johnson had launched the war on poverty, and that was a major investment into programs of social uplift. But at the same time, the movement was hitting limits. King recognized the advances they'd made, and at the same time, he could see how much more deeply society needed to change, because in the midst of all these historic victories, there continued to be oppression and discrimination in jobs, in housing, in education. Johnson's figurative war on poverty was accompanied by an imperialist war in Vietnam, where the poor of the US were conscripted and sent around the world to kill and be killed by the poor in Vietnam. Now, King even acknowledged in one of his later speeches that the advances they had made had been quick gains and easy victories. Those are his words. That is shocking to think about because we know what was involved in those civil rights struggles. Murders, lynchings, bombings, fire hoses, police dogs. Easy victories? It feels absurd to say that. And King acknowledged as much. But he also knew that the next phase of struggle would in fact be harder and require a whole different conception of struggle. And so the Poor People's Campaign was born. An effort to unite the poor across historic lines of division. A movement, as King described, from civil rights to human rights, bringing together poor blacks in the South and poor whites in Appalachia, Chicano farm workers and indigenous communities, people on welfare and those living in the slums, whether they were in cities or the countryside. At the time, this was not a particularly popular idea. King received tremendous pushback from all sides. Former allies abandoned him towards the end of his life. The Poor People's Campaign was widely dismissed. He struggled to build a shared vision, even with his staff at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But nonetheless, they forged ahead. And they convened leaders of all of these different groups that had not yet engaged in struggle together. Communities where the poor were organized and were getting organized. But we all know what happened. April 4th, 1968, exactly 1 year after he gave that historic speech at Riverside. Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis while supporting striking sanitation workers. And the rudder to the ship was lost. While many groups had stayed away from the Poor People's Campaign, they rushed to suddenly join King's final work. The shared vision and the collective consciousness that was necessary, though, wasn't deep enough. They moved forward, and in May of 1968, poor people from around the country arrived in DC, and they set up Resurrection City on the National Mall. They organized marches and protests, as well as cultural exchanges and community building amongst those present. The movement at the time took another hit with the assassination of Robert Kennedy, who was an early supporter. Resurrection City was infiltrated by multiple federal agencies. And I always get a kick out of this. Apparently the person who organized the Lost and Found booth was an FBI informant. It was just like, what was he reporting, right? Oh, John lost his coat today. Better demoralizing effect. And we like to joke about DC being a swamp, but you have to remember it's a literal swamp. This is built on a swamp. And the Parks Department, before Resurrection City arrived, had helpfully fertilized the National Mall. It was not a pleasant place to be in May and June of '68 with so much rain and in those conditions. And that was it. After about 6 weeks, demoralized, divided in many ways, they went home. The campaign was a failure. And it's rarely brought up in commemorations and reflections of King. But the crises that King identified and the core vision of the Poor People's Campaign remain incredibly relevant today, over 50 years later. There are more people in poverty in the United States today than in 1968. And in our studies and our analysis, we say 140 million, that's nearly half of the US population, are in poverty or one small emergency away, right? Can't afford a $1,000 emergency or a $1,000 car repair. Maybe have a health crisis, and even if you have insurance, those costs can still add up really quickly, right? Voting rights in many places are now more restrictive than they were when the Voting Rights Act was passed. The military budget is vastly higher now than it was then. And that has devastating, deadly impacts around the world, but here as well, where our domestic priorities like healthcare, safe housing, and a healthy environment are shunted aside in favor of more war. People die not only by bullets and bombs, but by disinvestment in our communities. But at the core of King's vision is this profoundly revolutionary idea that the poor, as a class, are the leading social force, the potential revolutionary agents that can transform our society. The quote we're using today for our reflection elaborates on this, and it's worth studying in depth. You have it printed in your program. I'm going to go through it effectively line by line. So first off, he says, the dispossessed of this nation. That is not a word we are used to hearing, right? What does that mean, dispossessed? It's people who are alienated from this system that we live under. People who have no stake in the maintenance of this system that doesn't guarantee their housing, doesn't guarantee them health care or a healthy environment as basic human rights. What interest do the poor have in propping up a system that keeps them in poverty? So he goes on, the dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. The poor across racial lines. And in other places, King would be more clear about all of the divisions and segments of our class that suffer under this system, whether it be gender, sexuality, race, geography, right? We suffer under this system, which he calls cruelly unjust. The system is vicious. It devours people. Our society is engaged in a war on the poor. Poor people are either criminalized or treated as a charity case. And the presence of poverty is never understood as a failure of the system, but always understood and presented as a failure of the individual. You didn't study hard enough. You didn't work hard enough. And that's why you're in poverty. But in a country with persistent poverty and where there are 140 million people who are struggling to survive, to insist that our struggles are somehow our own fault is flatly cruel. He goes on, they must organize a revolution, not against the lives of the persons who are their fellow citizens, but against the structures. Listen, if Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Warren Buffett disappeared tomorrow, these crises would remain. However guilty some powerful individuals may be, and they are very guilty, it's the systems that are funneling wealth to the rich. Someone else will just take their place. King goes on, refusing to take the means that have been called for and which are at hand. This is related. The resources exist to end poverty. It is not a question of our society not having enough. We live in the most productive, the wealthiest society that history has ever known. And when millions are suffering and struggling, that means the system is the problem. These are solvable problems, and the reason we are poor is because they are rich. He says, the only real revolutionary is someone who has nothing to lose, and this is tough, because everybody, no matter your circumstances, almost certainly has something to lose. But we have to recognize the precariousness that this system puts us in. And the pandemic has, unfortunately, exposed this, ripping the Band-Aid off. How on the edge so many people truly are as they lost jobs and correspondingly their health care, their health insurance, right? In the midst of a health pandemic. The federal government is about to end the federal health emergency that expanded access to Medicaid, and that in New York State alone will likely kick about 1 million people off of their health care. They're going to end the federal health emergency and create a health emergency. But we have to understand that this system is not for us. There's a leader in the Poor People's Campaign from the South. He's frequently featured in some of our national videos. I think he says it best. Our backs are against the wall, and we've got no choice but to push. King goes on, he says, if they can be helped to take action together. This is important because we're so inundated with narratives about charity. But this is a very specific kind of help. This is not a handout or even a hand up. This is a collective commitment to taking action together. And that is something everyone in our individualistic society struggles to do. If you've ever tried to organize a potluck, let alone any kind of bigger event, you know how challenging collective action can be, right? It doesn't get easier as it gets bigger. But taking action requires us to come together, and unity is not simple. It does not just happen. We don't sit down and suddenly racism and patriarchy and sexism and homophobia just disappear, right? We have to work through that stuff together, collectively. Unity is a process. And it's a process of learning and unlearning the lies our society has poisoned us with. We need to develop leaders in defiance of the narratives that say poor people are incapable of doing anything. Layers and layers, cores of leaders with the clarity, the competence, the commitment, and the connectedness to take on these massive systems of oppression. King calls it a new and unsettling force, because if we can do this, if our class can take action together to become a fighting force of the poor and dispossessed, a nonviolent army of the poor, as King says elsewhere, we'll have a chance. If you'll forgive the violent metaphor, we need to kill this system before it kills us. For our class, for the poor and the dispossessed, to no longer be merely objects of history to be manipulated and controlled, but to instead become genuine agents of change, throwing our shoulders to the wheel of history to transform society. We cannot simply adjust things around the edges. For our demands to be met, for human rights to be respected, the present state of things must become deeply unsettled. Now, what does this look like for us now in New York? We have been organizing the New York State Poor People's Campaign since 2017, building networks and cores of leaders around our state. It is slow work, and we've had ups and downs. We've chosen to focus on healthcare and housing, not to the exclusion of all other issues, but because by focusing on those, we've found that we can most effectively bring people together in a fusion movement across all those lines of division. Because no matter who you are or where you live, what gender, skin color, your background is, you've got to figure out how you're going to put a roof over your head and how you're going to get your healthcare needs met. And that provides an opportunity for us to bring together all different kinds of people in a shared struggle. It's just the starting point, but it's an opportunity. Now, just this past week, the governor gave the annual State of the State speech, but it's really a state of the rich. She didn't mention poor or poverty once. And while there are some good proposals she has, they fall far short of what is necessary to end poverty in our state. For instance, her housing plan, which proposes to build 800,000 new homes in 10 years, is laudable, but without any rental protections or the right to counsel for tenants who are facing eviction proceedings, her plans amount to a giveaway to the wealthy and her real estate investor donors. She's proposing rollbacks of bail reform and the hiring of thousands of new prosecutors. I assure you, they are not going to be going after white-collar criminals on Wall Street. Instead, they'll be put to work, locking up poor people, primarily people of color. She is not offering real solutions to our problems, and that is because she and her ruling class compatriots have no real solutions to our problems. They are our problem. So instead, we're going to make our voices heard. Our strategy in the New York State Poor People's Campaign has three parts. First, we say, we shift the narrative by shifting the narrator. As I've mentioned, and they need to be dismantled. And the best way to do that is to uplift the voices of those who are directly suffering under the lost without Dr. King. We can't make the same mistake. We need many Martins, hundreds, thousands of leaders who can develop other leaders, who will then develop other leaders, and so on. And lastly, our strategy involves influencing policies and elections. We do that by organizing and building power together, putting pressure on elected officials where necessary. We engage in campaigns to build the capacity and strength of our class, not for short-term wins, although those are important, but understanding that we are part of a protracted struggle and that we need to build permanently organized communities who understand that every step forward creates new challenges and requires the development of new strategies and new tactics, and always, always, more and more people built into our network. We use these campaigns to practice leadership, to build skills, to bring others into our movement. Now, Dr. King understood the movement for justice as a church. He referred to a freedom church of the poor. And in many ways, communities of faith sometimes feel as though they've become irrelevant in our world. And many of our structures in faith communities feel dated, maybe a little out of place, but if we understand the purpose of our communities, why we gather like we do, right? Places to gather, share, celebrate, mourn, and organize, we can begin to understand these places as bases of operations, spaces of community resilience, of community defense, and organizing where we practice the ways of the beloved community that we hope to achieve in our world. Places where we can break the isolation and the individualism of our society. Building the resolve, the spirit, the commitment to carry the struggle forward. Dr. King's vision and the work we're engaged in today have a profoundly theological component, not in the sense of intellectual assent or agreement about abstract and metaphysical questions of which we can only speculate, but a trust and a belief, and yes, a faith that the material conditions of our world, where so few have so much and so many struggle to merely survive, that these conditions do not need to remain the same. It is hard to wake up every day and believe that, right? Most days, I admit, I do not always believe that. It is a struggle, and we need to support one another and encourage each other. And these are the spaces where we can build communities that can do that. Change is not only possible, but it is necessary. So together, in our commitment to justice, we can take up the unfinished work of Dr. King. And there's a call we like to use to end a lot of our meetings. I think it's a good one for our present moment and movement. It comes from the North Carolina Moral Mondays movement, which was led by our current National Poor People's Campaign co-chair, Reverend William Barber. We say, forward together, not one step back.
Each week, we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in a spirit of love and generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who have gone before, those who in their turn gave generously. Our offering goes to support the work of love and justice undertaken by this community. Today's offering will also be shared with PrideWorks. Please refer to our e-newsletter or website for more information. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering. The words are in your order of service. May these gifts and the work of our hands and hearts give power to all we stand for as a community of faith. And now please stand as you are willing and able and join in singing hymn number 129, Let Love Continue Long.
And if that love
please join me now in extinguishing the chalice. The words are also found in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I'd like to offer a benediction. A few years ago, I got to hear Reverend William Barber speak in Albany on MLK weekend, and he said, "I don't do Martin Luther King celebrations anymore." He said, because when our heroes are taken down, when they fall, the correct thing to do is not to celebrate them, but to pick up the baton and carry that work forward. So in the spirit of struggle, in the spirit of the movement that continues today, may you be filled with an inspiration, with encouragement from your community, from one another, to carry this work forward, to go out and be the community of faith, to build that freedom church of the poor.